barn, begged the mail-order bride. The angry rancher locked the house, said, "No, but," somewhere outside Abilene, Texas, November 1882. The wind howled across the empty plains, slicing through the brittle trees like a whip of cold iron. Rain fell in punishing sheets, turning the dirt roads to thick, sucking mud. The sky, a low ceiling of gunmetal gray, offered no mercy. From the distant rise came a lone figure, hunched against the storm. Her dress clung to her frame, soaked through and torn at the hem. Celia Hart, 25, and already worn by too many winters of life, trudged through the mire with a small bundle tied tightly to her back. Her 3-year-old son, Eli, his head buried against her neck, breath shallow and warm. Her boots had split hours ago, the wet earth chewing at her steps. A single satchel hung from her shoulder, soaked and nearly empty. She moved like a ghost, face pale with exhaustion, eyes fixed forward with the brittle resolve of a mother who had no other choice. Just 2 days earlier, she had arrived by stagecoach, her heart heavy but hopeful, to marry a man named Thomas Bartley, a rancher who had ordered her by post. He had written kindly enough, "Promise to accept your past, whatever it may be." She had clung to those words like scripture. But when he opened the door and saw the child, his face changed, his eyes narrowed, his voice turned sharp. "You didn't say you had a bastard." Celia stood silent, the boy clinging to her leg. She tried to explain, tried to say she had no one else, that Eli was her world. Bartley had none of it. "You lied. Get off my land." She remembered the sound of her suitcase hitting the mud. Remembered not crying, not begging, only lifting Eli into her arms and walking away. Now, night was falling. The storm showed no signs of mercy. The weight of Eli grew heavier with every step, though the child made no sound. Celia feared the shivering in his small body, the heat of his cheek against hers. She remembered Bartley mentioning a neighbor, Wade Callahan. "A strange one," he had muttered, "keeps to himself, lost his wife, don't bother with him." But in the middle of the cold, open wild, one name was better than none. When she saw the house, sturdy, square, with smoke rising faintly from the chimney, she nearly collapsed. Her legs moved out of will, not strength. She made it to the porch, her hands numb as she knocked once, twice, then again, harder. The sound of footsteps came from within. She held her breath. Eli stirred on her shoulder, coughing. A moment later, the door opened. A tall man stood there, framed in the golden flicker of a lantern. His face was carved in stillness, broad shoulders, short beard, eyes a shade too quiet. He wore a thick wool shirt and work trousers. His hand gripped the lantern handle tightly. He said nothing at first, just looked at her, her soaked dress, the limp child, her trembling lips. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I do not mean to disturb you. I was sent here to marry a man named Bartley, but he turned me away when he saw my son. We have nowhere else. I don't ask to stay in your home. Only the barn. Just tonight, please." He didn't answer. His eyes shifted slightly, not unkind but guarded, suspicious. Before he could speak, a small voice broke the silence. Eli, now awake, slid from her arms and stood barefoot on the porch boards. His little body shivered, but he looked up at the man with wide, solemn eyes. "Sir, you don't have to let us inside," Eli said softly. "Mama said not to bother folks, but she's real cold. I can sleep in the barn if you just help my mama." The words hit Wade like a sudden strike. His chest tightened. He looked at the child, the tiny hands clutching his mother's coat, the wet hair sticking to his forehead, the ache in his voice too old for his years. He said nothing. Then, slowly, quietly, he closed the door. Celia stood motionless. The sound of the latch sliding home was louder than thunder. She did not cry. She only sat down on the edge of the porch, pulled Eli into her lap, and wrapped her thin shawl around them both. The rain kept falling, and in the flickering shadows cast by the light behind the window, she waited for mercy, for morning, for anything. Wade Callahan sat at the kitchen table, elbows on worn pine, a cup of black coffee cooling untouched beside his hand. The lantern above cast slow, swinging shadows across the room, as the storm outside continued to beat against the windows like it wanted in. He was 34, had owned this land for 11 years. 600 acres of dust, cattle, and wind, all of it kept alive by calloused hands and a heart that had long since learned not to need anyone. His wife, Anna, had died 4 winters ago. Fever took her fast. Their baby girl, Lily, had followed 2 nights later. He hadn't spoken much since. The woman on his porch was none of his concern. That was the first thought Wade clung to. He had no room in his life for stray travelers and broken promises. If her story was true, and it sounded half mad to begin with, then she should be on the next coach out, not darkening his doorstep in the middle of a storm. But as he sat there, staring into the dull glow of the lantern, he could not shake one thing: the boy's voice. "Mama said not to bother folks, but she's real cold." Wade exhaled slowly, fingers tightening around the edge of the table, his jaw locked tight. The sound of the storm filled the silence. He rose from the chair, heavy boots thudding against the wooden floor. He crossed to the window and pulled back the curtain with 2 fingers. Outside, under the low shelter of the porch, the woman was still there, Celia Hart. She sat against the wall, knees drawn up, her arms wrapped around the child like a shield. The boy, Eli, was curled into her lap, wrapped in her shawl, coughing softly. Her hands rubbed his back through the cloth, movements slow and mechanical. The rain had soaked through her dress, her shoulders shook, her hair hung limp, stuck to her cheeks, and still she held the child like he was all that mattered. Wade's eyes narrowed, but not in anger. In memory. A vision came to him, one he had buried like a stone. Anna, weak in bed, holding Lily to her chest, humming a lullaby she could barely finish. Lily coughing, fever burning her skin. Wade, sitting helpless at the doorway, fists clenched, watching the 2 people he loved most dissolve into silence. And he had done nothing but sit. His hand dropped from the curtain, his eyes closed. For a long second, there was only the sound of the fire crackling behind him and the echo of that boy's voice. Then Wade moved. He went to the door, pulled it open with one smooth motion. The lantern in his hand lit his face from below. Sharp lines, shadowed cheekbones, a look of stone weathered by sorrow. Celia flinched, shielding Eli. He did not speak. He only tilted his head, stepping aside in the doorway. His hand gestured inside. "Come in." The words were low, flat, but unmistakable. Celia hesitated, clutching Eli closer. "Please," she whispered. But Wade was already walking back into the house. She rose to her feet, legs shaking, eyes wide with disbelief and exhaustion. She followed the open door, stepping into warmth, into light, into the unknown. Behind her, the storm kept raging. But the door was open now. Celia hesitated in the doorway, her arms tightening protectively around Eli. The warmth from inside the house washed over her skin like a shock, almost painful after the relentless cold outside. The scent of burning wood, old pine floors, and something faintly like coffee filled her nose. Wade said nothing. He walked ahead with quiet, heavy steps and gestured toward the kitchen with a brief nod. She followed him into the room, plain, functional, but blessedly warm. A stone hearth flickered with orange flame, casting soft light across the table and shelves. Wade set the lantern down, knelt beside the fireplace, and stoked the coals with practiced hands. Sparks jumped, the flames rose. He stood, walked to a cupboard, and pulled out 2 folded cloths, coarse but dry. He handed one to her without a word, then disappeared into the pantry. Celia used it to dry Eli's face, then her own trembling hands. When Wade returned, he held a small pot of soup. No steam rose from it, but it was enough. He poured it into 2 wooden bowls and set them on the table. He took a seat across from them, picked up his spoon, and began to eat, slow and methodical. Celia remained standing, uncertain. Her instincts still buzzed with the memory of slammed doors and bitter words. "Sit," Wade said, not unkindly, without looking up. She obeyed, placing Eli on her lap. The boy was quiet, eyes glazed with exhaustion. Celia spooned a bit of broth into his mouth, coaxing him gently. He swallowed, then sagged against her chest, limp and warm. Wade broke the silence after a few minutes, his voice low and flat. "Why didn't you tell him you had a child?" Celia blinked. Her hand paused mid-air. She did not answer right away. Then, in a voice barely louder than the fire's crackle, she replied, "Because if I had, he would not have written back." She looked up at Wade now. Her eyes glistened, but did not spill. "I tried to believe that maybe he'd understand once he saw us, but I knew the risk. I knew what most men think when they see a woman with a child." Her voice caught, but she forced it steady. "I couldn't leave Eli behind. I'd rather sleep in the mud holding him, than lie in silk, and forget he exists." Wade did not speak. He looked away. Eli, warm now, drifted to sleep again, his little hand gripping a fold in his mother's dress. Wade stood, pushing his empty bowl away. He picked up a second lantern from the mantel and lit it. "Come on," he said simply. Celia rose, lifting Eli with her. She followed him down a short hallway that creaked beneath their steps. Wade opened a door and held the lantern up. The room inside was small but clean. A narrow bed with a quilted coverlet. A lace curtain fluttered in the draft from the chimney. A vanity table stood in the corner, its surface empty but for a dusty comb. Celia hesitated at the threshold. Her eyes scanned the room, taking in the details. "This was someone's room," she whispered. Wade nodded once. "My wife's?" She turned to him, eyes wide. "I can sleep on the floor. I do not mean to." He shook his head and cut her off, voice quiet. "It's warmer than the barn." Then, without waiting for a response, he set the lantern on the bedside table and walked away. Celia stared after him for a long moment. Then, gently, she laid Eli down on the bed. The boy barely stirred, curling into the blankets like he belonged there. She sat beside him, brushing the damp curls from his forehead. Her fingers lingered, her breath caught in her throat. "Thank you," she whispered, though no one remained to hear it. And for the first time in days, as she watched her son breathe deeply in peace, she let herself cry, not from fear nor shame, but from something she thought she had forgotten. Gratitude. The sun had not yet cleared the hills when Celia stirred awake. The room still smelled faintly of wood smoke and old cedar, the remnants of a home once filled with another woman's presence. Eli slept soundly beside her, wrapped tight in the quilt that still held traces of lavender. She watched him breathe for a long moment before slipping out from under the covers. Barefoot and silent, Celia tiptoed down the hall and into the kitchen. Wade was nowhere in sight. The coals in the hearth had nearly died. She knelt and coaxed them back to life, her fingers stained with soot. She boiled water, found a tin of coffee tucked beside the cupboard, and brewed a small pot. The scent filled the house slowly, something warm, something steady. By the time Wade entered the kitchen, boots heavy on the wood floor, A plate of cornbread and scrambled eggs sat on the table. Celia was rinsing dishes at the basin, her sleeves rolled up. He looked at her, then at the food. "You didn't have to do that." "I wanted to," she replied without turning. He did not thank her. But he sat and ate every bite. That day, Celia worked with quiet purpose. She found a needle and thread in a drawer and mended the rip on the sleeve of Wade's gray work shirt, the one hanging by the door. She scrubbed the old dish linens in a bucket out back, humming softly while Eli napped inside. When she spotted the horse trough low on water, she rolled up her skirts and filled it herself, bucket after bucket from the well. No one had asked her, but something inside her refused to be a burden, not after the mercy she had been shown. From the barn door, Wade watched her. Not openly, just passing glances as he tossed hay to the cattle or repaired a fence post. She was different than he expected, not soft in the way of most women, but not hardened either. She moved like someone who had lived through disappointment, but not let it rot her spirit. He told himself to keep his distance. But the truth was, he noticed. That afternoon, while Eli napped in the warmth of the kitchen rug, Celia took the yoke and 2 empty buckets. She made her way to the well, determined to refill the wash barrel before sundown. Her arms already ached. Her stomach turned from lack of food. Still, she pressed on, sweat beading her brow in the mild spring heat. The return trip from the well was long and uneven. Halfway across the yard, the world tilted. Her knees buckled. The buckets hit the ground with a loud thud, water sloshing across the dirt. Wade, inside the barn, heard it. He dropped his tools and ran. Celia lay crumpled on her side, eyes closed, skin pale. He bent, checked her breathing, then scooped her up into his arms. She was lighter than he expected, fragile in a way that made his chest clench. He carried her into the house and laid her gently on the wooden rocking chair near the hearth. Her face was damp with sweat, strands of hair sticking to her cheeks. He fetched a cloth, dipped it in warm water, and pressed it to her forehead. Then he stirred honey into a mug of warm water and coaxed it to her lips. "Easy now," he muttered. "Drink a little." She stirred, eyelids fluttering open, confused, dazed. "You fainted," he said simply. She blinked at him, then looked down. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to." "Don't talk. Just breathe." A small patter of feet interrupted them. Eli stood at the doorway, eyes wide, lip trembling. "Mama?" Wade turned. He stood, placed a reassuring hand on the boy's shoulder. "She's all right," he said softly. "Just needs some rest." Eli nodded, stepping closer to his mother, slipping his tiny fingers into hers. She squeezed them weakly and smiled. That night, after Celia had fallen into deep sleep and Eli dozed at her side, Wade sat alone at the table. The only sound was the crackle of the fire and the ticking of an old clock. He noticed the boy's shoes by the door, cracked leather, worn soles, barely holding together. Wade picked one up, turned it in his hand. He did not ask Celia. He did not tell her. Instead, he found a needle, some thick thread, and sat beneath the lamplight. His fingers were too big, too clumsy, and the needle pricked him twice. Still, he kept going, stitch after careful stitch. It had been years since he had mended anything, but something in him refused to let that boy walk another mile with broken shoes. Dinner was quieter now, but it was no longer lonely. Wade had taken to setting out 3 plates instead of 1. At first, Celia hesitated. The first night he motioned for her and Eli to sit at the table with him, she nearly declined. But the boy had already clambered into the chair beside Wade, babbling about the smell of beans and cornbread. After that, it became routine. They ate in calm silence, sometimes broken by Eli's curious questions or soft laughter. Wade rarely spoke unless spoken to, but the lines in his face had started to loosen. as though he had finally remembered what it felt like to sit with company and not dread it. At night, Celia would sit in the rocker by the fire, book in hand, reading softly while Eli curled up near her feet. Wade listened from the table or from just beyond the doorframe. Her voice was gentle, a low, steady rhythm that warmed the room in a way the fire could not. She read from old farm journals, Bible stories, and even a worn-out novel she had brought in her bag. It was not the words themselves that mattered, it was the way she made them feel like home. He had forgotten how that sounded. Wade started spending more time with Eli, too, not out of duty, but instinct. The boy followed him to the barn one morning, barefoot and bright-eyed, asking to help. Wade handed him a handful of oats. "Feed him flat," he said, guiding Eli's palm to the horse's muzzle. "Let him trust you." Eli giggled when the horse's warm breath tickled his fingers. From the house, Celia watched through the window. Her hands were still soaked from scrubbing laundry, but she froze, heart clenching. She had never seen Eli smile like that with another man. Later that week, Wade gave Eli an old rope and taught him how to loop it. The boy practiced for hours, his laughter filling the barn. "Uncle Wade," he called him once by accident. Then, shyly corrected himself. "I mean, Mr. Wade." Wade had only nodded, but he didn't correct him. One afternoon, Celia noticed hammering in the barn. When she peeked in, Wade was building something, a low partition in the corner of the main stall. It had a small roof, a tiny window, and a swinging half-door no higher than a child's chest. "What is that?" she asked, brushing straw from her skirt. Wade didn't look up from his hammer. "Just a little place, somewhere Eli can be around the animals, but stay out of the way. Thought he'd like it." Celia stared, lips parting slightly. "You built it for him?" He shrugged. "Chow no kun gok, kuorieng min." That night, she added an extra log to the fire and stitched the beginnings of a curtain for the tiny barn room. Days shortened. The first snow dusted the fence lines in early December. Life grew slower, but no less full. Each moment took on weight, the way Wade passed the sugar before Celia asked, the way Eli leaned against his leg without fear, the quiet nods exchanged when words felt too loud. Then came the evening she would never forget. Wade called Eli out to the back pasture just before sunset. The sky was streaked with orange and deep violet, the cold air sharp and still. Celia stood at the back porch, arms crossed, watching. A saddled mare waited in the field. Eli hesitated as Wade lifted him up, setting him gently on the saddle. "Sit straight, hands on the horn, just like I showed you." The boy beamed. Wade led the horse slowly in a circle, one hand holding the reins, the other steady on Eli's leg. The child's laughter echoed in the crisp air. From the shadows of the porch, Celia's hands rose to her chest. Her throat ached. This was the first time Eli had been on a horse, the first time someone other than her had shown him how to be brave. Tears welled without warning. She turned away, stepping inside, shoulders trembling. She did not sob, she did not crumble. But the tears came anyway, soft, silent streaks down her cheeks. Not for sorrow, not for pain, but because something inside her was breaking open, and what poured out was love and gratitude. The midday sun hung high, glinting off the dry rails of the fence and the metal roof of the barn. It was quiet, the kind of quiet that came after chores were done but before supper had begun. Then came the sound of wheels crunching over gravel. Celia stepped onto the porch, drying her hands on her apron. A covered wagon, drawn by two tired-looking mules, came to a halt at the front gate. Dust settled slowly around it. The door swung open. Out stepped Jeb Monroe. He wore polished boots and a brown waistcoat that didn't belong to the terrain. His hat was new. His smile, as he spotted Celia, was not. "Well, I'll be," he drawled. "Didn't think you'd land somewhere this comfortable." Celia froze. Eli, playing near the porch steps with a carved wooden horse, stood up. She grabbed his hand instinctively and pulled him behind her. Wade emerged from the barn, sleeves rolled up, hands smeared with axle grease. He saw the wagon, the stranger, the way Celia stood rigid on the porch, pale but defiant. He walked slowly toward them, not wiping his hands. Jeb kept his eyes on Celia. "I came for what's mine," he said, voice oily. "You took my money, promised a union, then disappeared like a thief. That's fraud, darlin'. I got papers sayin' so." He pulled a folded sheet from his coat and waved it in the air. "A signed marriage contract. Right here. Witnessed and dated. Makes you my wife or my thief. Either way, you owe me." Celia's face went white. She shook her head. "That paper is forged. I never signed anything." "But you accepted the coin," Jeb snapped. $50 for your hand. And you ran off." "She was forced to," Wade said, now standing between them. "She left you because you're not worth the dirt on your own boots." Jeb raised a brow at him. "And who are you supposed to be?" Wade didn't answer. He turned on his heel, walked back toward the house, and returned moments later with a worn leather pouch. He tossed it onto the dirt at Jeb's feet. "There's more in there than you ever paid her," Wade said calmly. "Consider it payment for your mistake. Take it, and leave." Jeb didn't bend down. "You buying her now? Is that what this is?" His smile curled. "Mean. What's she to you, anyhow?" Wade didn't flinch, didn't blink. "She's mine." The words landed like a gunshot, not shouted, not snarled, just spoken with the kind of quiet certainty that could not be bought or faked. Celia's breath caught. Eli looked up at her, confused by the sudden stillness. Jeb's face twitched. He glanced from Wade to Celia, then down at the pouch. His pride warred with his greed, but only for a second. He picked up the pouch, weighed it in his palm, and spat into the dirt. "Fine," he muttered. "She ain't worth the trip anyway." He climbed back into the wagon, turned the mule cart around, and disappeared down the road without another word. Celia didn't move. Not until the wagon was out of sight. Then her knees nearly gave out. She held Eli close, burying her face in his hair, tears falling freely now, hot, silent sobs that had nothing to do with fear. Wade didn't speak. He simply stood nearby, jaw clenched, arms folded, a sentinel made of something stronger than wood or stone. For the first time in her life, someone had stood for her. And not just anyone. Him. The first thaw of spring brought color back to the land. Snow melted into soft, muddy trails, and green teased the edges of the pasture like something half-remembered. Birds returned to the barn rafters. Calves cried in the morning light. Celia stood at the edge of the garden, hands buried in the fresh soil, her eyes not on the rows she had planned to plant, but on the open road that ran east. She had made up her mind. She would leave when the ground was firm enough for travel. Eli was healthier now, stronger. And Wade had already given them too much. Shelter, food. A kind of quiet care he never said aloud, but showed in every act she could not keep taking. Not without giving something he hadn't asked for. She couldn't risk misunderstanding his kindness as something more, or worse, make him feel trapped. She folded a letter that night, tucked it in the top drawer of the vanity in the guest room. It said goodbye in the only way she knew how. Brief, respectful, grateful. But before dawn the next day, as she packed the small satchel she'd arrived with, Wade knocked on the door. She opened it slowly. He stood there, hat in hand, jaw tight like he'd been rehearsing something for hours. I know what you're planning, he said. Her heart sank. Wade, He held up a piece of parchment, folded, crisp. This is yours. Celia took it with trembling fingers. She opened it and froze. It was an official land deed, 50 acres, bordering his, marked in her name, no conditions. Her voice broke. I don't understand. I'm not giving you anything, he said quietly. You earned every acre. She shook her head, eyes filling. I didn't. I'm investing, Wade interrupted, in a future, for Eli, and for his mother. Celia stared at him, breath caught between disbelief and something far deeper. She wanted to speak, to protest, to fall to her knees in the dirt, but then Wade added, so softly she almost didn't hear. I was thinking we'd build a new house on the ridge, something warmer, more windows. She blinked. He took a step closer, voice steady. You can pick the wood if you like. That was all he said. No grand speeches, no ring, just an open door, not to a barn this time, but to something far more lasting. Her lips parted, but no words came. Instead, she pressed the paper to her chest, nodded once, and wept into the morning sun. The clearing smelled of pine and wildflowers. Spring had painted the forest in soft greens and tender blues, and the morning sun spilled golden light through the branches overhead. A simple arch, built from cedar branches and tied with white cloth, stood at the edge of the grove. Nothing grand, nothing borrowed, just right. Celia stood beneath it, her hair braided with wild daisies, her dress plain but clean. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from something deeper, the kind of joy that scared a heart too used to surviving. Wade waited for her with a quiet smile, the same way he always did. Steady, patient, never pushing. And walking down the aisle of grass and sunlight between them was Eli. The boy clutched a small wooden box in his hands, face serious as a preacher. He wore a vest too big for him, and boots that Wade had polished himself. He stopped before them, opened the box with a deep breath, and looked up. I got him, Mama, he whispered. Celia bent down, kissed his forehead. You did perfect. The ceremony was short, just the preacher from town, a neighbor or two as witnesses, and the forest to listen. But when Wade took Celia's hand and slid the ring onto her finger, the air held its breath. I don't make promises I can't keep, Wade said quietly, eyes locked to hers. But I'll keep this one. Celia's lips trembled as she whispered back, and I'll never run again. Afterward, under the tall pines, they shared bread and cider from a picnic basket and watched Eli chase a bluebird down the hill. Celia sat beside Wade, her head on his shoulder, fingers tangled with his. Later that evening, in the golden hour before dusk, she wrote a letter to her mother, the first one in years. Mama, I did not marry a man with gold in his pocket or land in every direction, but I married a man whose word is good, whose hands are kind, and whose silence makes me feel safe. I married a man who took in a woman no one wanted, and a child no one asked for, and made us his family. I found home, Mama. Not a place, a person. And Eli, he finally calls someone Pa. Love always, Celia. That evening, Wade pulled Eli into his arms, crouched low, and handed him a piece of paper, official, signed, and stamped. You're mine now, Wade said, if you want to be. Eli's eyes lit up. He threw his arms around Wade's neck and whispered, I always wanted to be. And then, as the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the open field, the three of them rode together, Wade on his bay gelding, Celia on her mare, and Eli seated snug between them. The world was wide, the wind was soft, and behind them the shadows stretched long, the silhouettes of a man, a woman, and the boy who bound them, slowly disappearing into the horizon. Home wasn't where they came from. It was where they rode, together. In a world where the cold can be harsher than bullets, and silence deeper than any canyon, Celia, Eli, and Wade remind us of one simple truth. Home is not where you live, but who you're willing to open your door for. This is a story about second chances, quiet bravery, and the kind of love that doesn't announce itself. It proves itself. In stitched shoes, in shared meals, in standing between someone and the pain chasing them. When a stranger asks only for a barn and ends up with a family, we're reminded that dignity costs nothing, and kindness changes everything. If this story moved you, let your heart ride a little further with us. Hit the like button if you believe in love that rises from dust. Subscribe to Wild West Love Stories for more tales where bullets missed, but hearts didn't. And remember, sometimes the bravest thing you can do is open the door,